Hello, and welcome to The Political Dispatch, the podcast that explores the world of politics and policy through conversation. Imagine you're sitting at a dinner table with friends discussing the latest news and the impact it has on our world. That's the vibe we aim to bring to each episode. In today's fast-paced news cycle, it's easy to get lost in the details. Our goal is to step back and look at the broader trends shaping our society, from economic policies and international relations to social justice and environmental challenges. We cover it all with clarity and insight. We believe that just as it takes an array of ingredients to form a delectable dish, similarly, it takes a variety of insights and opinions to form a well-rounded perspective. Whether you're a policy wonk, a political junkie, or just someone who wants to stay informed, the Political Dispatch is your go-to source for thoughtful and engaging discussions on the issues that matter most.
My name is Lily Mott.
I'm Sidd Kurapati.
And I'm Tom Spare.
And we're all master's students at Cardiff University. Between work, dissertations, and everything else in life, we'll be meeting weekly to deliver the Political Dispatch.
So each week, one of us will lead on a topic. We will look at the politics, the policy, and all the players involved. We will take a deep dive into the big issues affecting our planet, the politics, and our way of life.
Elections, AI, and the future of work, education. What are the debates driving the issues? What are the different perspectives and angles? We take you through the implications and what it might mean for you, your community, the country, and the wider world. This week's topic is a continuation for what we were discussing last week, and that's the general election, and the results are in. It's been a really interesting sort of 24-hour period, and to experience all of this, I guess, guys, let's just get into it. What are our thoughts? What are the key headlines so far?
I think for me, the key, I feel like first we can talk just a little bit about our experiences just with the election, because I think we're all in very different places from even in the world. Tom, you can talk about that. But this is the first general election that I've ever really closely followed, and being here for it has been really interesting. I think it's so interesting the way that people are really tuning in to each seat, and people were staying up all night to watch the polls, and that's just something that does not happen in the US as much. I think people are really interested in, of course, the results of the election, but the idea that people are staying up all night and they're watching it, I think it's really exciting, and I think that you can really feel the energy just being here. I think that, people are excited to participate, and I think it's been cool to just see how excited people are about the whole system and the whole situation. I think it gives me a little bit more hope for democracy just being here. So I think that's been really exciting, but maybe that's just me. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Lily. It's been a fascinating election, right from the announcement of the dates, the snap elections, the manifestos that have come out, and also just the voting system that they have over here. Considering that we're in 2024, we still use paper ballots over here in the UK. And the fact that you're able to count paper ballots in less than 12 hours is fascinating, to say the least. In fact, last night I was just going through a couple of videos on social media to see how people are reacting to everything. And one of the videos which really stood out for me was there was a public square. I don't know which public square, but and there was a giant screen over there, and people were waiting to see what the exit polls are going to say. And as soon as the exit polls were displayed on the public screen over there, and you had this loud resounding, roar of celebration that the Labour is going to be getting 410, and clearly the exit polls were just two seats off.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, I think it was it projected onto one of the BBC buildings in central London, and I had a moment of sort of anticipation, waiting for what the exit poll would be. And as we're speaking now, just Keir Starmer's coming into Downing Street. So Sir Keir is the 58th Prime Minister to be elected, and the first Labour Prime Minister in 14 years. And he's entering with his wife. They're just about to get out. There's lots of flag waving. I can see a few Welsh flags, which is great to see. And just a little reminder in terms of the spread of results, Labour won big across the UK, but won back lots of seats in Wales and in Scotland, which is a big moment for the party. And yeah, we got lots of Union Jacks, which isn't surprising because Sir Keir Starmer has been pushing the whole thing of sort of nationalism, British unity, and so on, being proud of being British, that sort of thing. And so we've got British flags, we've got a few Welsh flags and Scottish flags as well. Probably all Labour folks in outside Downing Street as well. So they're not really perhaps a true reflection of the wider population and how they feel about Labour. But yeah, I've been watching this all over in France, which has been really fascinating. There's been the French elections, which have been going on, the parliamentary elections, the first round, and the far right have made some really big inroads over here. And there's a lot of concern that the far right will make big gains in the second round. And when we're talking about voting systems, France uses a different thing. So you have a first round and then loads of candidates are knocked out. And then the second round, there's lots of people leaving their seats to allow other alternative parties that might have a better chance of winning against particular parties. Whereas in the British system, it's first past the post. So Labour has won with 9 million votes, 35% of the share of votes, which is the lowest a winning party has ever won to get into government. And the spread of votes is pretty historic across the board, really. But yeah, it's been fascinating watching it from France. And most French folks aren't particularly interested in what's going on in Britain. So
they've got their own chaos right now, and I'm sure we can talk about that in a later episode. But I was just kind of doing a little bit of Googling, and it's been really interesting to see the difference in coverage from different outlets. So I was looking at CNN's coverage versus BBC and that type of thing. But The Independent has this really interesting article that I was checking out where they are talking about the election turnout and how it's on track to be the lowest since 2001. And so right now they say it's about 59.8, but if it drops below 59.4%, it's the lowest turnout since the Second World War. So I think when we're talking about just on a macro level, I think it's so interesting that we are seeing so much excitement, but also the turnout's still not that high. And I wonder I guess that kind of brings me down a little bit from what I was saying, how thrilled I was for democracy and how excited I was, because it's still not the best participation. But I think that also might have to do some with the voter ID laws, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of that. But I just wanted to put that out there. Wanted to give a little caveat to my previous statement about how excited everybody is, because I guess the turnout still is not that high. In fact, on track to be the lowest in 20 years. So that's my little caveat. Gotta bring us back down.
Bring down to reality. Yeah, I mean, it's a drop of about 8%, I think. And again, it's sort of a bit of a done deal. As the election progressed, the Conservatives changed track several times in their positioning. But basically they said, don't turn out to vote or do turn out to vote, don't turn out. They were given a very mixed message because otherwise Labour's going to end up with a supermajority. And it's pretty much on track with what happened in 1997 in terms of turnout. In terms of Labour's majority. So I think they're going to have about 176 seats, and in 1997 they had 179. So it sort of matches up. But Labour's numbers of votes in 1997 was 13 million. Now they've got 9 million. Turnout in 1997 was 71%. So it's a big difference in terms of people's enthusiasm for the general election, really as a whole.
Speaking of margins and vote shares, it's fascinating how 1.6% increase in their vote share and a dip of a staggering 19.9% has resulted in such a majority for the Labour Party. And similarly, you've had the Reform UK, which has got like approximately 15% rise in vote share. It really shows how elections or the voters can be, can really shock the government to the extent of the loss, at least in this case. And that was very interesting to see from an analytical perspective as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's the voter share is really fascinating. I mean, the smaller parties have had the biggest percentage share of the vote ever in UK elections. And the Reform's done very well, Green Party's done very well. And then weirdly, the Lib Dems have done, not weirdly, the Lib Dems have done well, but weirdly, they've got 13% of the votes and 71 MPs. And then Reform have got 15% of the vote share, and they've only ended up with 4 MPs. So it's fascinating how this system's worked. And the first past the post system always benefits established parties. So that's how it sort of turned out.
Do you see changes with that, Tom, following this or do you see like maybe some protests around it? I know we talked about the Electoral College last time, so now I'll kind of turn the question back on you. What do you think is going to happen with just the future of this system? Do you think this is going to be kind of raising some red flags as far as the way that it's working, or?
Well, usually the Lib Dems are really up for this. They sort of say that let's have political reform in terms of voting system, but actually they've benefited probably the most from this system. So now they're in a bit of a bind because they go, well, actually, if we change the voting system now, we're not going to do as well next time. And Labour won't do as well, anywhere near as well. If it's going to be based on them getting 35% of the vote, they're not going to have that majority. I think a lot of things would have to change wider within the UK system if there was to be a voting system change, because it means that there's going to be less governments who rule by majority, and it's going to be a lot more coalition. So it'd have to be a big cultural change, I think. I don't know what your thoughts are, guys.
I think the first past the post system is not perfect. And when we look at it from an overall perspective, when we just club the numbers, we see a very different picture than what it really is. But it takes a lot of strategy, political strategy, to realize that in a first past the post system, the fact is that you don't really need to go ahead and concentrate on the entire country. You can just focus on certain areas and you could still probably win the election. And that's probably the beauty of it. So they might have, Reforms has got like a lot of votes, 4 million votes approximately, across the country, but they've not had the votes that is necessary for them to win the number of seats in the areas that they were contesting as much. What they've basically done is, from what I understand, is that they've eaten into the vote share of the Conservative Party, but it wasn't enough for them to go ahead and win the seat. So whenever the next general election happens, you might see a larger Reform UK in the parliament, I would say.
Yeah, and if Reform didn't put forward its candidates, the Conservatives would have won 2/3 of the seats that they lost. So it just demonstrates how much they've eaten in. And this is the wider argument, there isn't excitement for Labour. It's just people were so fed up with the Conservative Party. It isn't a Labour victory. It's a Conservative loss, and that's the difference here. Whereas in 1997, there was very much, the economy was on the up, people were enthusiastic, but there'd been 18 years of the Conservative Party, and it was time for a change. Now it's the economy is sort of flatlining. There are, we're in an environmental crisis, political crisis, lots of conflicts around the world. It's a very different time, and people aren't as optimistic. But the new Prime Minister, in his speech, is talking about uniting the country and moving forward. So I think it's going to be an uphill struggle for them. But also, something that's worth pointing out is a lot of the Labour victories are quite narrow. So they're going to have a lot of seats to defend, and they're going to have to be satisfying a lot of different types of voters, which we sort of discussed in the previous episode.
One of the things to build upon, one of the things that you were saying was the anti-incumbency aspect of this election, which really stood out and why it is more of a Conservative loss than a Labour victory. Not to take away anything from the Labour Party, but it's also very surprising to see out of the 30 cabinet members of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, 14 ministers, and some of them really senior ones, lost their seats. And some of the more popular ones lost the seats. So I was also wondering, is there any sort of candidate-specific animosity in this election that you see, that we've seen, rather?
Yeah, do you want to go with that, Lily? There's some big names that we've seen lose their seats.
Yeah, I was just going to say we can segue into some of the kind of biggest losers, biggest winners. I mean, I think Liz Truss has had it coming for a little bit. I think, of course, the whole world kind of knows about her. I think she might actually be one of the most famous British politicians because of the whole lettuce saga. I think even if you ask, they might not know her name, but everybody knows about the lettuce saga. So she only lost by 630 votes. I mean, I think as far as animosity against her, I don't know. But I think as far as just a big name who lost her seat, and unfortunately she's making headlines as one of the biggest losers. And the other one is Jacob Rees-Mogg, which I think, Tom, you can probably talk a little bit more about as far as just the history behind his reign of sorts. But those are the two, I feel like, the biggest names, just people that, you know, have been really prolific in British politics. So yeah, Tom, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, the key people that have lost their seats by pretty margins. I mean, Liz Truss only lost by 600 odd votes, but she also had a majority of 26,000. So in essence, she's lost by 26,600 and whatever it is. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, again, you know, Liz Truss was a Remainer, then became very sort of right, went to the right. She actually started her political life as a Lib Dem, so she's had quite a journey. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, very key ally of Boris Johnson, and you know his father's very famous economist. He lost his seat in Somerset. He'd been punished, I think, for being a key component of Brexit. Steve Baker as well, who is a really key proponent of the Brexit sort of push, and all the support really of the Brexit supporting folks has moved over to Reform, and that's why we've seen the support of Nigel Farage winning in Clacton, and then winning in a number of sort of key areas. I mean, Essex, that part of Essex is sort of very Brexit focused, but Brexit was not really a point of discussion at this election. So I think people are being punished more on the last couple of years rather than Brexit itself.
I think we also had a couple of others, right? Defense Secretary Grant Shapps, and you also had Penny Mordaunt. I remember she had a very prominent sort of screen time when the coronation was happening. And I thought probably after this loss, she would probably go for, try and make her bid to become the leader of the Conservative Party. But clearly, that's not really going to work out this time.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, she was up there with the potentials. So, and Suella Braverman's got through. I think Kemi Badenoch's got through as well. So these are the people that they're probably going to see. But already the signals that have been sent around by the Conservative Party, everyone's sort of saying, let's have a period of reflection. Let's not rush into anything. Rishi Sunak has said that it's time to not rush things and to be. I think actually probably going to see quite a reflective time for the Conservatives, which would be beneficial for everyone, I think.
There was something which I really noticed in this election, and one thing which I also read about is that I think the whole idea that you have two parties over here, the Labour and the Conservatives, which have pretty much dominated the politics in the UK since forever. But you also see the rise of two alternate players over here, the Lib Dems being an alternate for the Labour, and while the Reform UK is an alternate for the Conservative Party. It also feels that the voters are now the loyalty amongst party loyalty amongst voters is probably a little less than before, and it's that we're going to hold you accountable within 5 years, And if you're not doing the job well enough, we could actually see these two parties do far better in the next election, even more. You know, the Lib Dems have done their best in their election since the formation, and so have Reform UK. I think Reform UK is far more conservative than the Conservative Party itself. And similarly, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, sorry, has been, far more Labour, if I can call it that, than the Labour Party itself in this particular election. So that was something which I thought was very interesting to see. And 71 seats in so far in a parliament of 650 odd is pretty big, and they would have like a really they should at least have a fairly loud voice in the parliament now.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the most votes the Liberal Democrats have ever got. The most, I think, was 62 or something around that, sort of low 60s in 2005. So it's a big moment for them. I think it would have made bigger news if Labour didn't have as many MPs, and how big their majority is, so 170 odd. So there isn't a big enough opposition apart from Conservatives to make a concerted effort to undermine what Labour's up to. But yeah, I think it's a big time for the Liberal Democrats. Also, it's historical in the fact that, as you say, Sidd, for a very long time, it's always been presented that it's a two-party race. But this is the most votes a third party has ever got in 100 years. So it's a big moment for the Liberal Democrats. And the more votes and the more candidates they have, the more money they have to sustain their political operation too. And this is something I've been putting out on social media, why it's beneficial actually voting for the smaller parties, because it gives them extra funds, which was something that I was actually not quite familiar with, and I probably should have been more clued up on being a politics student. But yeah, so I mean, and the Green Party as well. They've got 3 new MPs, well, 4 new MPs actually. Everyone's brand new. And their 2 co-leaders have won seats, and Bristol, they took off Labour, and their other co-leader won a new seat. So yeah, good big day for them, and I think a lot of progressives will be cheering because Lib Dems and Greens doing well, and a lot of Labour candidates relatively progressive as well.
And then just to complicate the party discussion a little bit further, but maybe we can talk about some of the Sinn Féin, Scottish National Party, some of those losses and wins, because I think the SNP loss is really significant, but then Sinn Féin becoming the largest Northern Ireland Westminster party. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit too, because I think that's really interesting as far as, BBC is reporting the frustration of the SNP. So what are your guys' takes on that as well?
Yeah, the SNP vote is a complete collapse, and it's a reflection of a lot of internal issues that have been going on over the last few years. And since Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister of Scotland, resigned because of links to do with her husband and lots of corruption allegations and so on, that's been a big move for them. And also, yeah, Sinn Féin's rise in Northern Ireland and across the Republic as well, over on the border, presents a new sort of reality for Ireland that I think a united Ireland is closer than we've ever seen in our lifetimes anyway. They're all big changes, and where the SNP have lost, Labour's gained. So in the 2010 general election and 2015 election, that's when the SNP were taking seats off Labour. So they've recovered that. And Douglas Alexander is a good sort of representation of Scottish Labour's rise, former Foreign Secretary, I believe, and he lost his seat famously to the SNP, so he's regained that. So it's just demonstrates the cyclical nature of British politics anyway. If you wait long enough, the same things come back again.
I think it's fascinating that you mentioned that Ireland has never been so united. To do what exactly?
Well, Sinn Féin's the sort of party that would like to see a united Ireland.
Right. Okay.
So that south of the border in the Republic, they're doing very
Mm.
well, and then in Northern Ireland now they've done very well with their MPs. But I'm on the understanding that Sinn Féin never shows up to the British Parliament because they don't believe that Northern Ireland is part of Britain. So it'd be interesting now they've got more seats, whether they change that point of view and whether they actually will actually sit in the British Parliament.
Yeah, it's famously true that they have those seats vacant right at the end of the opposition benches, that they're always vacant for Sinn Féin. Yeah, that's interesting. Talking about interesting points, there was one very interesting thing which I wanted to see. Considering that we're all students, I wanted to see how cities or towns which have major universities have voted. Interestingly enough, almost all of them, even if you keep London aside, almost all of them have voted for either Lib Dems or the Labour Party. So if you talk about Oxford, Cambridge, Cardiff, St. Andrews, Lancaster, Sheffield, Exeter, Bristol, all of them. So I was trying to think about how these universities make an impact on the voters, and the education levels kind of like determine the voting choice of the people. So it's something it'll be very interesting for us to explore probably later on. But this is a very micro level aspect. I thought it was a very interesting point to look at.
And it'd be interesting to see as well on those figures who came second in each of those cities too. I mean, obviously Bristol Central has gone green, and Brighton is green again still. So two university towns, and I think green's coming second in a lot of places. We'll see them, take up a lot more votes in the future as they get more infrastructure, and I think will be proof to young people that their voice has been heard, and that the green agenda is still there, even if Labour have sort of seemingly dumped a lot of their promises on Greens.
I think it's interesting too, because when I was doing some of this work to mobilize people during the registration, what I didn't realize is that in the UK, it's legal to be registered in two places. So you're allowed to be registered at your home address and also at your university address, which is so interesting because that's incredibly promising to me as far as trying to get young people to actually vote. You have to go through the process of making sure that you have your ballot in the right place and things. And there's like a couple steps that you have to go through. But even allowing students to do that is so interesting because in the US, you have to go through this whole process of making sure that you're registered at your home, getting your ballot sent to you, and then sending it back to your state. So it makes it incredibly complicated, and most students just don't have time for it, which is a way of disenfranchising them. But it's such an interesting idea that here you actually can be involved in either election, or in either race, which also makes it more interesting as far as strategic voting. Theoretically, you could really decide where your vote's going to count more and vote there if you got really into it. If you have some political junkies who are interested in that, which I do think is really interesting. And there's definitely no surprise that a lot of those college cities and towns went liberal, because that's professors and students and things. But I just thought that was so interesting because it's very different than the US electoral system, and I think it's a lot better to allow for that choice. It's more encouraging and tells young people that they actually do want their votes. So I think that's refreshing to me, but just wanted to add that in there. I would also love to know, so as far as where we stand now, as we're recording this podcast, we still have a couple votes and seats that are still trickling in.
As in what way, Lily?
Just not decided yet, right? We still got, let's see, two seats left.
Yeah. What are they? Which seats are they?
I think one of them's up in Scotland.
Inverness, Skye, and West Yorkshire. Where's the other one? This is like, where's Wally? Where's Waldo, I suppose, to our American listeners.
South Basildon and East Thurrock. Yeah.
Okay, I'm nervous now because I don't actually know where that is. Sorry to all the residents.
All the way on the east coast, outside of London.
Oh, outside of London, okay.
Far outside.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, they must be really close calls, I guess. That's probably the reason why they're so delayed.
Counting the paper ballots.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a few screw ups around that, because the post office, Royal Mail, sorry, should I say, there was uncertainty whether they'd get everyone's postal votes in time. And actually, my partner's been voting in the French elections, and they can vote online. So I think that's a pretty cool system. And also something to bear in mind is Brits abroad can only vote up to 5 years out of living outside the UK. And after that, they lose their ability to vote. Hi everyone, Tom here. I just wanted to make a correction. At one point I say that Brits need to lose their right to vote if they live abroad after 5 years. It's actually every 3 years Brits have to re-register their vote wherever they are in the world. And then if they don't re-register in time, there's sort of a longer process that's involved. Just a quick correction there. Thanks for listening. Bye. Yeah. So you would actually have a lot more people turning out to vote if you included expats and, if you were able to vote online. It's just whether you can make that secure. And countries like Estonia, they have all their votes online, so it is possible.
I didn't know that about the 5 years out, though. That's kind of an interesting rule. I don't know if that makes any sense. I would have to think on that.
You're always a citizen.
Yeah.
It's the great promise of America, isn't it? That wherever you are in the world, but you were born in the US or you came to America to live or whatever, and you get your citizenship, you are American and you can vote. So it seems quite counterproductive. And I also think if you live here and if you pay taxes, then you should be able to vote. Doesn't matter where you're from. That's sort of my view on it. Because it's not a true reflection then of everyone that can vote. It's really unfair on all of our friends who are Europeans that can't vote, for example.
I think that is true. Also, it's interesting because my partner, he has settled status here, and they actually allowed him to register. And then when he went to the polls, realized that he couldn't. But after he had already gone to the polls and they had allowed him to register for the general election. So that to me was like a very strange, and he hadn't received his ballot in the mail, so he knew there was something wrong. But that to me was so strange as far as just the organization of it. It just seemed very disorganized, but maybe it was just where he lives. And he said, it was a little bit tricky to figure that out. But I think it would make sense for someone with his legal status to be able to vote. He's lived here for 10 years. So interesting. That's for another episode.
Well, Sid, what was your experience of being able to vote?
I first of all, I thought it was fascinating to know that I've just been here roughly a year. Not even a year yet, and that I could actually go ahead and vote just because I'm a citizen of the Commonwealth, and also that I have immigration status with a BRP. So I was half expecting to be told to you can't vote once I went there, and luckily the polling booth was a 3-minute walk from where I stay, so it was nothing. Quite an interesting experience for me. Interestingly, we also have the same system back in India where if you're a citizen, and if you're registered, you can always vote. Doesn't matter how many years you've been outside India, you can always come back and you can go ahead and vote. But the fact that I was just here for 10 months, I'm here for 10 months and I can vote has been a really cool experience and something that I never expected. And I think that's what's fascinating about democracies, evolved democracies, I suppose. Say, for example, in France, that the fact that you mentioned that you can actually vote online, I would find that very scary because it's just so susceptible to, all the evils out there. But fascinating experience for me.
Are you pleased with who you voted for?
Yeah, I think I'm quite pleased with who I voted for. The person didn't win, but that's okay. Yeah, I voted for who I voted for, so that's all right. That's all right.
A couple more things I suppose we should mention. Plaid Cymru does very well. They increased their votes from 2 MPs to 4. There are no longer any Conservative MPs in Wales. There's only a handful of MPs, Conservative MPs in Scotland. So their journey to soul searching or whatever they're going to do is going to be a long way coming. But there again, the swings that we've seen in 2019 and 2024, majorities of two opposing parties, demonstrates that the British voters aren't as predictable as many people thought they were.
So Tom, what does this mean exactly for Wales? You have more number of Labour MPs in the Parliament. You got 4 Plaid Cymru MPs in the Parliament. You got a few, I think, a couple of Lib Dem as well, maybe one Lib Dem MP as well. So what does this mean for Wales, and how do you see it shaping the Welsh politics now?
Well, I think it's beneficial for Wales that there's a Labour government in London as well as in Cardiff, but it's not a silver bullet. There's a lot of challenges up ahead, and I was just saw on social media one of the more independent media outlets was sharing a list that basically there's a person called Sue Gray who's going to be a really important figure in the Labour government. She's a former senior civil servant who's basically going to be running the domestic side of things, making sure that all of the different agencies and departments within the government are going to be talking to one another and focusing on Labour, who are going to be what they have a mission-driven government. So their focus will be 5 main missions, and if it's not relevant to the mission, they're not going to focus on it. It should be a different way of doing government. And I won't say what the name of the list is because it involves swearing, so we can't. But let's just call it a poo list. And the main things on the list are the collapse of Thames Water, which currently has an £18 billion debt after its investors refused to stump up emergency funding. Overcrowding in prisons, so Britain's prison population at 99% capacity, and they will run out of space by the end of this month. 4 in 10 universities in England are predicted to go into the red, into the red by the end of the year. Some at the risk of collapsing entirely because of a fall in numbers of international students. There is the NHS shortfall, so the waiting lists for NHS patients in England is 7.6 million people. And also failing local councils. So nearly 1 in 5 council leaders in England say they're at risk of bankruptcy this year. So there's currently a £4 billion gap in funding. So not as positive thing to end on, but it's just to be clear what the mission is ahead. It's going to be a rough couple of years, I think.
Yeah, what a great vote of confidence to end on, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, things won't get better for a little bit, and then they might get better at the end of the Parliament, and that's what they're planning on doing. So I think Labour are lucky to have as big a majority as they are, because if it was, they'd lose the next election possibly. I mean, they still could, I suppose. But
I have actually a question of what's next about this. Now that the election's done, he's clearly had the appointment with His Majesty the King, and he's been appointed as the UK PM. So I suppose now the shadow cabinet kind of translates into the official cabinet, or do you expect any surprises over there? Because it'll be very interesting to see how that shapes up in the next few days.
It doesn't always translate. So the key figures we'll probably see announced are Rachel Reeves, who's was the shadow chancellor, and is now likely to become the Chancellor of the Exchequer, first woman to ever hold the post. And also the Education Secretary is quite likely to carry on. Wes Streeting, who was Shadow Health Secretary, was likely to be the Health Secretary, but his majority is now very slim, and you don't want the embarrassment of your cabinet losing seats at future elections. So it'd be interesting to see if Keir Starmer stays with him. There's a couple of surprise losses, as we were talking earlier, so there's a couple of posts to fill. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some old names come back in. So someone like Douglas Alexander, he was in government many years ago, so I think he'll probably be bumped up the list and promoted. It'll be interesting to see if David Lammy carries on as Foreign Secretary. There's been some speculation that he might not get that post. And there'll be a few more. So the main core team will remain, but there might be other surprises in the lead up. But and Angela Rayner as well, I should mention, who will probably become the Deputy Prime Minister and leader of leading on levelling up, which is all about building stuff.
Right. So lots to look forward to in the next couple of weeks, and to find out how the cabinet is going to be formed. On a final note, Tom, if you had to sum up this election in one line, how would you do it?
Started off raining, was very boring, and went on for too long, and ended with sunshine.
There you go.
There we go.
You heard it here, folks. Thank you, Tom.
All right, then, as we have come to the end of this podcast, 2 more seats are yet to be counted, but we do know the outcome of this election. We have the Labour Party winning a massive number of seats, finishing off with 412 as of now. They have gained a staggering 211 seats in this election. Coming in second position is the Conservative Party at 121 seats. They have lost a staggering 250 seats in this election. They probably go back to the drawing board and figure out their strategies and how they're going to perform in the next election. In third position, we have Liberal Democrats at 71 seats. They've gained 63 seats in this election. The Scottish Nationalist Party has got 9 seats. They've lost 38. Sinn Féin remains at 7 seats. So not really any change from the last election that took place in 2019. Other key players that have done really well in this election, of course, we should start off with Reform UK, which has now got 4 seats, but a brilliant 14.3% vote share in this election. Similarly, the Green Party has got 4 seats, jumping up from 1 seat that they had in the previous election. And Plaid Cymru, which has now 4 seats, adding 2 more to their tally.
What a great way to sum it all up. What have we got for next week?
So on Thursday, I'm going to be chatting to Charles from University of Kent, and we're going to be talking about Macron and the French elections, and that's going to be the focus of the next episode. So we're going to go from a British election to a French election, as we've got the next round of voting in France is happening on Sunday.
And in the meantime, we would really appreciate it if you're listening to this, if you could subscribe to the podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so send them to us. Our personal accounts will be linked in the description of the episode, and you can also send them to @BeTheChange Media Network, and I will pass it along to this team. Yeah, we really just want to hear comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Send us questions. This is going to be recorded pretty regularly, so if you have things that you want us to discuss, we can do that. Reach out to us.
Yes. Any future suggestions of episodes too? We're always looking for things that we can investigate and discuss.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.